Organizations want to modernize technology because modernizing technology drives business outcome. But what if they're not sure they want to hire a full-time process engineer just yet? Larger paychecks? Yes. Hybrid work? Yes. Attractive to our talent. But what else can we do to invest in our talent, make sure we retain them? We're going to talk about these things and a lot more on today's episode. Michelle, let's get into it.
Sounds great, Rocky.
Welcome to Bites and Banter, a podcast sponsored by HDI local chapters. In today's episode, we're going to talk to Michelle Perella about a new resource that comes out every year. It's the Demand for Skilled Talent Report by Robert Half. Michelle, this is a really awesome resource, and we have a lot of questions about it. But if you want to take a second, just introduce yourself. If you want to give a high level of kind of what this report is for our audience before we dive in.
Absolutely. Well, it's great to be here. Great to talk about some of the great resources that Robert Half has available to our clients and job seekers out there in the technology labor market. I'm the branch director for the technology practice group in our Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania office. Um, been with the company for 8 years now, and I head up our technology operations team. The Demand for Skilled Talent report is actually a biannual report that we produce that discusses technology, well, not just technology, labor market and employment trends across the United States, talks about a market overview, what we're seeing out there in the employment market. It offers great data to job seekers and hiring managers and provides a comprehensive overview to help with hiring and decision making around hiring new employees.
I did take a look at the report and specifically the technology section, which is what we're going to talk about today. Number one thing that stood out to me is there was over 1 million job postings within the tech market that were reviewed. Some things I think were pretty expected, at least when I'm looking at it, from a software engineering, development jobs, kind of staying stagnant, kind of staying the same. They're in demand, right? That's not changing. What I found really interesting, and I would love to hear a little bit more about, is really just 400,000 new jobs in executive leadership and operations roles. Can you talk a little bit about what these roles are? Is this kind of a change in what we've seen in the past? What's driving the demand for these executive and operation roles? And really, how can employees who are in that role and employers who have employees in the role retain those talent, definitely with as many incoming open roles as fit that specific criteria that just kind of took me by surprise.
Yeah, it is a significant number. And I think what we're seeing that's driving the demand, and again, it's based on what's happening in the market and the ever-changing technology landscape. So we're looking at companies focusing on cybersecurity and systems, AI, machine learning, automation, cloud initiatives, technology modernization, and to implement those digital strategies and to modernize their technology, they need leadership. So that's where a lot of these roles are coming from, because right now a lot of companies don't have that infrastructure in place. They've kind of just been managing with their current teams. Well, now they need somebody to build out a digital strategy. They need somebody to lead the technology modernization initiatives, and they need someone to build out those teams. So that's predominantly where those executive and leadership roles are coming from.
Interesting. So are these brand new roles to organizations who are now just kind of trying to modernize? Or are they, hey, we need to backfill roles because we need to bring in the skills that maybe wasn't in place in the role before? Or are you seeing kind of a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both, where maybe they're looking to upskill certain executive level positions, or they are newly created positions just simply out of the demand for those particular skill sets.
And what are those specific skill sets within these roles, right? If for one, people who are in these roles who want to maintain the position, right, in the leadership role they have, but people who maybe are interested in growing into this type of role, what kind of skills are you guys seeing that are really in demand in the market? I know you talked about machine learning and automation, but from a leadership perspective, kind of how do those all tie in together?
Yeah, I think the tie-in is not only having an in-depth understanding of all of those areas that I'd mentioned, machine learning, AI, automation, cloud initiatives, software engineering and development, but also prior success and or prior experience, being hands-on perhaps in that space and being able to leverage those skills and understand how to build teams with those particular skills is ultimately, I think, the main focus.
So it almost sounds like people who have had that technical experience in the past, there might not have been a clear way to leverage that and grow into leadership. And now that's becoming almost the norm and expected, is kind of what I hear you saying. Is that like a fair statement? Like, in order to be in that executive leadership in this technology space, you're really going to have an understanding of how all these things tie together and drive business outcomes.
100%. There's no question about it, and even if they haven't had hands-on experience, they need to, have the ability to learn those areas very quickly and be able to bring in the right resources, whether it's consulting solutions, talent solutions, whatever the case may be, to supplement their team and build out those strategies. So they're kind of, in some instances, maybe they have been hands on in previous roles, but in other instances, maybe they have to kind of learn on the spot, but they have the knowledge and the bandwidth and the ability to do that and the resources that they can turn to.
Yeah, leaders are readers, right? So at the end of the day, it's just interesting to see how leadership now in the tech space, you really have to have a ability to learn and adapt to these concepts and the way that these things work. Interesting. So I appreciate you answering that. I think that gives me a better understanding kind of how and why that trend is there. The next thing that really stood out to me was, COVID hit a couple years ago and the world drastically changed. And everybody knows that everybody was working from home. And what I think surprised me was that based on the postings, it seemed like only 25% of postings were actually hybrid and only 17% in the technology space were fully remote. Which honestly, that those numbers shock me because if you turn the clock back not even 2 years, it's a different world, completely different landscape. Everything's remote. You're not getting candidates unless you're remote, at least that's what it felt like. So how like, why are you seeing this shift, and is this a trend we can expect to see continue? And definitely given that, according to the report, 95% of organizations are facing challenges finding skilled talent in the technology space. How is the difference in hybrid versus remote versus fully on site going to impact those people who are looking for the talent for those skilled roles?
Yeah, 2 years ago, we were filling, I'd say 80% of the positions that we were filling were 100% remote. And it could be IT support, right up to a software engineer. I think what's changed is companies and hiring managers are not maximizing their teams to their full capabilities, and there's been this mindset to bring people back together. We could still offer hybrid work schedules, flexible schedules, but we want to bring our teams together. Now that being said, most companies, I think, to remain competitive and to attract the top talent in the market, do need to offer some flexible work arrangements. Those are the companies that are attracting and retaining the top talent. And for job seekers, as an example, 45% of technology and IT professionals are actively seeking new opportunities. And it's for two reasons: it's for higher compensation or flexible work schedules. So, 41% of those candidates are looking for improved benefits and perks, and that flexible hybrid schedule comes into play. So, it's a good sign for employers to expand their teams, but they have to focus on building out their perks, building out their benefits packages, and offering those flexible solutions to attract the best candidates and to retain that top talent. Um, 55% of tech hiring managers said that they would increase salaries to attract talent in cybersecurity. 51% said that they'd step up salary offers to get candidates with in demand cloud skills. So there's an appetite out there. And I think some of the best companies, the best hiring managers, they understand what they need to do to get those people in place and then keep them within their organization.
A lot there. It sounds like there is a just a sense in the talent technology world looking for talent that the collaboration that happens in person is extremely valuable, and maybe organizations have felt the gap in that over the last few years. I know that I don't know that the talent report looked at this. I'm just curious from a your side of the business at Robert Half. What have you seen driving the desire to have people in office, and kind of what gap does that bridge compared to that remote work as people try to build out those strategies for, hey, we need to offer, a comprehensive package, including flexible work. What's driving that need to have people together? And like, what if people realize that, if or if you've heard, what is the market saying? Like, this is why, we really want to have hybrid and not fully remote.
I think what we're seeing and what I'm hearing from a lot of the hiring managers that we're working with right now, and it's across industry, that they want their teams on site for collaboration, for project discussions. And yes, we know that most jobs can be fully remote. I think we saw that through the pandemic that we were all for the most part we were all able to do our jobs completely remote. That being said, I think that there's a lack of cohesiveness sometimes, is particularly if you're all in the same area. Bring people together. It's team buildings. It's an opportunity to meet people. There's a big difference in meeting people virtually and on site. And I know with my team, I would prefer to have us together, if not every day, maybe a couple of times a week, because that's when I think you truly get to know people. Uh, Other hiring managers, other leaders may have a different approach, but overall, I think we're seeing companies, they've got office space, this was the norm pre-COVID. Let's bring people back together, but let's come into the office with a purpose. We're not just going into the office for the sake of going into the office. There's got to be a reason there, and I think that's what's driving it, just to get people back together and get back to some type of normalcy. And I really think that contributes to building out a more effective, productive team.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense. Just that ability to get to know somebody in person is just very different, right, than behind a computer, and to see a lot of value in that. What have you found the most successful organizations that are looking for this skilled technology talent? What has been the sweet spot for hybrid work? Has there been anything you've seen like, oh, this is really the sweet spot, or it just kind of varies?
What we've seen is anywhere from 2 to 3 days on site. That seems to be the sweet spot and the meeting point between job seekers and employers. 2 to 3 days is truly a hybrid schedule. You get your team together, you get them into the office, and then they have the option to work remotely, work from home the other 2 days. And I think also not dictating what days they have to be in the office is important too. You've got to be cognizant of maybe what their schedule looks like. If they've got other responsibilities out, which we all have other responsibilities outside of work, but that work life balance piece. So having that flexibility, hey, we want you to come into the office 3 days a week, but employee, you dictate which days you come into the office.
That is true flexibility. Cool. So that brings another question in terms of if dev jobs all over the world, high in demand. Something I found interesting was the service desk and desk side type of roles. The unemployment rate was a lot lower than, like, over a point lower than the national average. It also begs me to ask the question, based on the hybrid work model, are you seeing the same trend in service desk work and desk side work? Obviously, desk side's a little different. You got to be on site with your hands on the computers for most of these roles. But how have you seen these roles becoming more competitive in terms of, right, the low unemployment rate? Like, how is that making them more competitive amongst different employers? And, how has hybrid work really come into play for these type of roles?
It is a very competitive position. There is a high demand in that space because if we go back to what we were talking about earlier, job seekers are looking for flexibility and higher compensation. That's why they would leave one role to move on to another, which then creates an opening at that previous company. So there's a high demand, I think, for a number of different reasons. Just to ensure that end users have the support that they need, and have the right resources in place. And again, it goes back to that ever changing technology landscape. But it also is a very sought after position by job seekers, particularly for those coming out or who are new to the employment market. It's a great stepping stone, it's a great way to get your foot in the door, that tier one IT support position. So, I believe that's what's creating the demand among job seekers. But then there's also that need for these companies to fill those positions as they continue to build out their IT support teams and potentially backfill vacant positions because maybe they weren't being competitive enough with compensation or offering that hybrid schedule if they were able to, if it was a true IT support position. But to your point, desktop support, desk side support, you don't have that luxury, but, in the other IT support roles, you do.
So have you seen like a trend going up? And I know, during the pandemic and even after the pandemic, before we saw this increase in hybrid work, like service desk agents and candidates, people who are looking to fill that role, a lot of times would pass up an opportunity because there was hybrid work. Have you seen that change? Is it becoming more of a norm and so it's kind of accepted? Or is it still there's still kind of a really a desire for that role to be fully remote? I'm just curious kind of what challenges or you've seen in that.
2 years ago, when we would talk to candidates about IT support positions and we were offering hybrid work schedules, the majority of our candidates would say, "Nope, I'm not interested. I want 100% remote." And at the time, that was still available. They could identify opportunities outside of the Pittsburgh area. But just over the past year, again, just that transition into the hybrid work schedule, candidates, I think we've educated enough candidates and they've seen enough job postings out there that either say on-site or hybrid, that there's an understanding that 100% remote is few and far between. If you find it, that's great. If you're in a 100% remote position, you should probably stay there because the chances of finding that again are slim to none. So, there's definitely been a major shift, and we've had to educate our local talent pool to understand that it's probably going to be hybrid, if not on site 5 days a week, depending on the type of position it is.
That is, I'm not gonna lie, encouraging to hear. Not because just getting people together, I think, is such a value for anybody, any profession, but for me, because someone who works in a service desk industry, I see that have historically that's been a challenge the last couple of years is finding people who are willing to say, "Hey, I'm willing to work hybrid." So encouraging to hear. Let's look at kind of I would say the opposite end of the spectrum because they do work very closely together, even though not in function. So let's talk about the AI and machine learning. Uh, Obviously, we live in a generative AI world where if me as an average Joe, I have no idea what AI is. You tell me traditional predictive AI, I don't know what you're talking about. But I can log into OpenAI and I can play with ChatGPT, right? I can ask it a question. It's more efficient than Google, not always more accurate, but I can very quickly, right, utilize generative AI. And your report showed that 72% of technology managers plan to increase the use of contract professionals specifically within that area, right? Within the software and application development, technology process automation. Is that an increase from the last several years driven by the higher demand for generative AI solutions? And do you see that trend being sustainable from a contract perspective or something that's going to change really depending on the application of generative AI and the is it tied to the cost of people who have these skills? So I'm just curious to hear you kind of walk through that because I thought it was really interesting data point.
Yeah, so the percentage of tech managers who plan to use contractors has increased significantly since the last half of 2023. And that is primarily well, there's a few different reasons. Number one, they've been running a really lean team. They don't have the bandwidth, maybe they don't have the budget to bring on an additional or add to their full-time headcount, or they don't have that particular skill set on their team. So I think that we will continue to see that demand, and it will be a sustainable trend just due to we just go back to that digital transformation piece. Companies are just working through these huge technology modernization initiatives. AI, machine learning, automation, that's the hot topic right now, and I don't see that going away anytime soon because we're still in the very early stages of AI. Um, I am by no means an AI expert. I don't claim to be. I defer anything AI related to our sister company, Protivity, which is the consulting arm of our business. They're the experts. But when it comes to that particular space, um, there's just that demand there for contractors because it is an in-demand skill set. There's not a whole lot of full-time job seekers out there with those particular skill sets, and companies are wanting to implement this technology. There's some uncertainty around it, so the thought is, well, let's bring on contract talent because maybe we don't need to add to our full-time headcount at this point. So I do think it's a sustainable demand, at least for the foreseeable future.
It's interesting to hear you kinda walk through, um, just what's driving that because AI, right? It chatbots, like, let's talk about chatbots for a second. Chatbots have been around since, like, the 1950s, like, and I'm actually writing an article that talks about just the history, and it was a psychotherapist named Eliza, which is very much similar to what you would think about before generative AI in that traditional, "Let me ask you a question, and I already know the answer based on what you asked," right? Very prescriptive. Um, and so it's just interesting to see the way that generative AI has brought that type of artificial intelligence to the wider mass. So out of curiosity, like what kind of roles or skills are organizations looking for in that contract work? Like what kind of experience are they looking for people that says, "Hey, you know XYZ in process automation." Like what are those certifications? What are those, degrees? What are those years of experience in XYZ? Like what have you found being that specific set of skills that are in demand for these type of roles, specifically to contract work?
I would say automation engineers are at the very top of that list of the most in-demand skill sets, and, that's and again, we're still so early on in this space, but what we're seeing from a contract perspective is companies looking to build out, a digital transformation team. I keep throwing that word around because that's the catchphrase. So with that comes, uh machine learning analysts, automation engineers, automation analysts, and those are individuals that typically transitioned, I'd say, over the past couple of years into that space from software application, your traditional .NET developers, but they were able to expand on their experience, whether it was through project work or maybe they had an opportunity for continuous education or an opportunity to upskill their experience through their company. So, they've got that core tech experience that they've been able to build upon based on the demand. And we're working with a company right now who is looking at automation processes. They want to build out this infrastructure, they want to build out a team, and they're looking at potentially bringing on 2 to 3 automation engineers just to kick off that initiative and then kind of build out the team from there because they're not sure what that will look like over the next 1 to 2 years, but that's kind of the starting point to handle the automation piece and just automate some of their more basic processes, day-to-day processes. So that's I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of what we're seeing in that space.
Yeah, I guess the next that makes me wonder too, how long do you see a lot of these contracts if you have experience in the automation space or you're like, "Hey, I've gotten my foot in the door. I've dabbled in automation. How long do you see these contracts usually being set up for in these type of, digital transformation projects where organizations like, hey, we don't necessarily want to hire a really high cost, engineer for an extended period of time because we don't know what this looks like yet. We want to start with contract work. What's that length usually look like for people who are, coming into these roles?
So, on average, when we place a software or application developer or engineer, the average length of contract is 6 to 9 months. And, maybe they're going in and a company is retiring a legacy application. They need some new development work done, or maybe they're developing a brand new application for the organization. So, on average, those types of roles are 6 to 9 months. I think because again, this is still so new to the technology landscape, if those projects are 6 to 9 months, we're probably looking at 1 year plus, if not longer, and then potentially even an opportunity to be hired into a full time permanent position with that organization if they determine, hey, great, thanks for implementing this, thanks for developing this. Now we need somebody to manage it. So I think there's long term contract potential and even potential to be hired into a full time permanent role with companies, depending on what their needs are.
It's funny, that's exactly what I was gonna ask, like, do you see this becoming okay, we don't know what we need, but realistically, in the world of AI, as you build something, you need to maintain it, right? You need to improve it. You need to make sure everything's working properly. So you answered the next question I already had in the back of my head was, okay, does this turn into something that's no longer just contract, right? Like we need this. Because I think it, from my experience, it seems like when organizations introduce AI that works well, so assuming you get it, the talent you need to build that and it works well, it automates some of those tasks that you want to take the manual effort out of. It's something you don't want to go away from, right? You don't want it to break. You want it to work because you see the efficiency it's given you as an organization. So interesting to hear how that might become more permanent and it's still early. So I'm interested to hear when we talk about this, the next time you guys release the talent report, the demand for talent, skilled talent report, how that's shifted, right? What is that number? So write that down and let's say, hey, 72% are hiring for this skill and contract work. What does that number do? And what does the permanent work look like next time we talk about it?
And I think we'll see a dramatic shift.
I think so too. I really do. I think organizations that are already tapping into right the likes of Robert Half Talent Solutions and see that demand and working on the digital transformation that you're talking about are going to have a leg up specifically to how they operate and I know you guys do a lot more than just that talent for technology, right? And this report, I'm imagining, does cover other industries as well. Is that true statement?
Yes.
I would love to see how organizations that are taking advantage of right that 72% of people saying yes, leaders saying I'm going to hire contract work for this space around automation and process automation and how that correlates to organizations that are the most attractive for candidates, right? Showing not even in that role, but as I invest in this space, the job for the rest of my organization becomes easier for them to drive business outcomes. It becomes more enjoyable for them to work for us because they see that investment. So I'm just curious to see how those correlate. And I know the report doesn't show that directly, but I'm thinking long term it would be a fun metric to look at to see, job satisfaction, talent retention, all those things tied to where are we seeing placement of AI professionals and process automation professionals. So, uh, the next, well, let me pause. Anything else you want to add on that space? Because I think it's such an important area that's growing. Before I jump into the next question I have for you, Michelle.
We do have a few different resources that I had mentioned our sister company Protivity that decision makers, hiring managers, businesses can turn to. We actually have a podcast. It's called The Rise of Generative AI with Christine Livingston, one of our Protivity partners. If there's interest in learning a little bit more about Christine and Protivity's insights on generative AI, that's a great resource. And another Protivity report, The Top Risks for 2024. Another great resource to turn to learn a little bit more about what we're anticipating and the challenges and risks associated with this new tech landscape that we're entering into.
It sounds like, there's a lot of good resources through Protivity. So, like, productivity. I love that. I love that name. Let me ask you the next question that I found interesting, the data point I found interesting. So, and you mentioned earlier, 55% of workers, technology workers, are saying, "Hey, I'm staying put." Whereas 45% are either looking or open to the idea or preparing to look for other roles. And you said salary, the people who are looking, salary is one of the main drivers, and then that hybrid work. Are those the 2? Are there anything else that you're seeing people who are staying put really commonalities within those organizations? What else are you seeing outside of the pay and the hybrid work?
Yeah, it really truly comes down to, so 55% it comes down to higher salary, 41% improved benefits. And the the common piece is just really the desire for those flexible work options. So smart companies, smart hiring managers know that hybrid and remote jobs help retain the top performers and attract that top talent. And companies can always do more to keep their workers engaged. So it's not only about compensation, because a common question that comes up when we're talking to job seekers is, of course, compensation. Tell me about the perks and benefits. Tell me about the flexible work schedule, but also talk to me about career advancement. What can this company offer? Can they help me upskill? Do they offer continuous learning? Can I obtain any certifications? So, if a company, as an example, is not able to, let's say, offer a higher compensation level or an increased salary, what else can they offer to those job seekers or those current employees to retain them and attract top talent? And those are the other areas: upskilling your current team, offering flexible work schedules, and just helping people grow and develop their skills and their career. Um, Not only the flexible work hours, but also summer hours. A lot of companies implement summer hours. We've seen that where
What
maybe
does that look like?
you get to leave early on a Friday at noon, or you work on some type of like rotation with your team where maybe you have every other Friday or every third Friday, a second or third Friday off. So I think if companies are willing to be creative, if they can't offer higher compensation, that goes a long way with their current employees and also job seekers that might be interested in working for them. If they're able to offer just a little bit more, I think those companies will beat out their competition and find the best people in the market.
A lot there. So it sounds like organizations that maybe are working within a budget, which I'd imagine is about 99.9% of organizations who are not maybe the big 3 that can get whatever they want, throw money at something, right? Like, most organizations are working within a budget. Getting creative is a good way to attract and retain talent, right? It's not all about the money, and I'm glad you said that because I think it's important. It's important to realize as tech leadership and tech leaders, it's not only can I give you a bigger check, right? It's not only can I let you work 100% remote. Sometimes it is, hey, how am I investing in you, preparing you to grow within this organization, and not necessarily being afraid of if you take that preparation and go somewhere else. Because if I'm doing my job and you're going to want to stay, right? Because of that investment and that creativity around how we're really really is a benefit, providing benefits that maybe aren't sitting on paper, right? On an offer letter, it's, hey, we're investing in you as a talent, and that keeps people around. So that's really, really, really cool to hear. What else can, if me as an employer or an employee want to know more about this space, about this resource, we'll make sure we provide links into the descriptions of these so people can go find them. But what else would you offer as a recommendation to, like, what can I explore? What can I find? What kind of details? And how can it help me as a potential employer and employee to learn more that will equip me better to be hired or to hire the right candidate?
So, As I said earlier, the demand for skilled talent report is biannual. So we share that data twice a year, and it's based on our market research and surveys that we've conducted. And we're in such a complex job market. Things have changed so much since pre-pandemic times. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster the past year. It kind of feels like we're stabilizing. And as an example, companies that put projects on hold last year seems like end of Q1 into Q2, they're ramping up those projects again. They're looking to add to their full-time staff, but it's still pretty complex. Some people in the news are still talking about recession, and there's still inflation concerns, and then you have others saying, "Hey, we're cautiously optimistic." So there still seems to be a lot of unknowns, but the one thing that remains is, whether it's in the technology space or elsewhere, the demand for skilled talent remains. Companies need the top talent to remain competitive, build and grow their businesses. So the demand for skilled talent report is predominantly around 2024 hiring and employment trends for the first half of the year. And it could really help hiring managers make very informed decisions for their company's specific, unique hiring needs. So I recommend, and I share it with all of our clients. It's one of the first things that comes up in conversation. Have you seen our demand for skilled talent report? If you haven't, let's set a time to walk through it, so you have the stats, you have the information that you need, so you can make sound hiring decisions. But even a job seeker would benefit from looking at this report, just to understand what other job seekers are experiencing in this market, what hiring managers and companies are looking for, and what the data tells us about the most in demand skill sets, and where maybe you could get some further education and training to make yourself more marketable, to get into the organization or the role that you want to be in. Um, the second resource, now this is our annual salary guide report. It's another great resource. It's based on market research and surveys that we've conducted, and it gives you instant access to market salary ranges for technology roles. And the great thing about our report, it's interactive, so you can localize it to your specific geography, and it adjusts the numbers for the cost of living in that particular area. It's another great resource, and there's not only salary information in there, but there's a wealth of other information about the labor market, hiring trends, the top certifications in the technology space, the top degrees that are most sought after. So you could realistically spend about 3 hours in our salary guide, just looking through all the great information. But
It may not have spent about 3 hours in the salary guide when it was released.
yeah, so I mean, it's a great tool, it's a great resource, and that coupled with the demand for skilled talent report, again, great for employers, great for job seekers to make sound decisions when they're looking at making a move, looking at staying in place, or looking to hire.
I love the resources that Robert Half releases because I feel like they're so useful. And transparently, unbiasedly, I will say I use them because they're very easy to use for me. For me, data is information. Data is only good if it's information, right? If it gives you something, you can do something with. If it's just numbers, it's arbitrary. But I feel like it does a really good job, right, between the salary guide and the skills, the demand for skilled talent. Both of them make it very easy to see what's relevant and find something that matters for me as someone who does hire and has as a team of people that hires in the tech space, specifically service desk. It gives me some insight into not only, hey, what are we doing? How are we compared to other people? How do we compare to the market? But also it gives me some insight to, hey, what's coming, right? How can I equip my people? And what are the things, the skills that I can go to my senior leadership or I can go to my colleague and say, hey, this is coming up and this is something that's trending in the market. We would really be remiss if we didn't get ahead of it, right? If we didn't adopt it. And so I encourage anybody who's either an employer or a job seeker to go look at it, go look at the resources. They're super useful and they're very informative, but they're not just a bunch of numbers. And you do see some white papers and releases, right? That you look at the numbers, you're like, that's interesting.
Right.
What do I do with that? Like, why does it matter? But Robert Half does a really good job of really talking to those trends and why they matter for the industry, for employees. So Anything else you want to add before I have one final send off question before we wrap up today's episode? But anything else you want to add about any of these resources before I ask you that final question?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of great information.
You were extremely efficient and covered a lot of good details, and I appreciate you one coming on and talk to me. I always love these conversations, and so I'm going to ask you, what words of advice or wisdom would you give 16-year-old Michelle?
I would number 1, I wish I was 20 years younger, but, um, I would invest in myself and continuously learning. Um, Never pass up an opportunity to get involved on a project, take on more work, just to build out your knowledge base and just to keep on learning and gaining skills that you can use in the future, even if you don't need them immediately. Um, Ask for feedback, positive or negative, from my leadership, my manager, and then act on it. Because 9 times out of 10, that individual is looking out for you and they want you to be a better version of yourself. So take that constructive criticism and run with it, which leads into embracing failure. Don't be afraid to fail because you fail a lot of times before you actually succeed. And failure is just a part of being successful. And then lastly, just prioritize work life balance. My younger days, I probably could have done a little bit better with that. And as I've gotten older, I've realized the importance of that. So just be mindful of your work life and your home life and keep that balance and you'll be in a good position.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your words of wisdom. Appreciate you talking about the demand for skilled talent report. So much good insight for people to check out and to apply and to help them, whether they're an employer or an employee, be equipped for the future. We look forward to talking to you all in the next episode of Bites and Banter. Have a fantastic rest of your week.
Yes. Yes. Well, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.